All right, welcome to the Sideline. We are joined today by a special guest. Former MLS executive Fred Matthes is joining us. More importantly, Fred was a CYA soccer coach way back when, the premier CYA soccer coach at that.
There you go.
So, Fred, welcome to the Sideline. We're excited to hear talk about soccer today. As everybody knows, we're pretty well talking about football all the time, but now the football season's done. We may revisit the Super Bowl a little bit. But today it's all about soccer and the history of soccer, and Fred has been with us here at CYA since the 90s. So we got a lot to talk about. I say we get into it. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks for joining us, Fred.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me out here. And whenever it's appropriate, I've got some CYA archives here that we can pull out and show off, too. So.
Beautiful.
Mark is always good for a good archive. He's always looking to find old school stuff.
And you know what? And I tell all the guests, bring something that we can kind of put in the studio because it's so purple now, which I truly don't mind. But we try to encourage a little color, some variety.
I brought you some blues stuff here, too.
All right. Yeah, and that's a good looking blue, too.
Yeah.
That's a good place to start. So, Fred, tell us what you're doing now and what the Blues are.
The Annapolis Blues there you go. Annapolis Blues is a project, as I call it. I changed my title around after leaving Major League Soccer years ago and working with some of the other teams around the country out in Sacramento for a few years with Sacramento Republic in the USL, as we talked about, the United Soccer League. I became a consultant, and I started just taking calls from people around the country that were trying to put together soccer clubs, whether it's professional level, amateur level, or that. And I did quite a few different teams that I was working on, and sometimes it would be a month or 2 months, 3 months, a week, and I got a call out of the blue. Wasn't really out of the blue, and not to use a pun there, but Michael Hitchcock, who was a colleague of mine at DC United, I actually had hired him way back in the beginning there. I saw what he was doing out in Annapolis, and I just sent him a quick note, said, "Hey, Hitch, looks like you got a team coming to Annapolis who's going to be playing in the USL 2, which again is a amateur level of the United Soccer League." And he said, yeah, it's going well. We got a lot of good sponsors over there and some investors that are coming in. He goes, but I really need a general manager. What do you think about that? And I said, well, wasn't really calling you about that, but yeah, tell me a little more about it. Annapolis is not too far away here from the Herndon Chantilly area where I live. But about 45 minutes to an hour on a good day to get over there. It wasn't too bad. It's a beautiful area. I said, yeah, let me go check it out. So I met some of the people over there, and he had a fairly young person that was coming in, Stephen Hooper, who later on became my assistant general manager, young guy, enthusiastic from Annapolis. And so we had some roots over there, and I was having to commute over that way, but we really started to build on the community idea, what we were talking about earlier before we started up, about how it's important for any soccer club to start out at whatever level they're at, to get some roots in the community, to start to meet people, get out and about. That's what we did in Annapolis, and it worked. We started selling season tickets, got some great merchandise and gear, like the scarves and that we give to our season ticket holders. We built a base up of almost 5,000 season ticket holders over there.
That's impressive.
That level of a club is phenomenal. There's teams in the 2 and 3 leagues above us that would be happy to have numbers like that. We were drawing huge crowds, upwards of 8,000 or 9,000 average a game, went as high as almost 13,000. And now my role has evolved a little bit, and I told Hitch this. I'd do this for a year, and 3 years later, I was still working at it. Finally said, Hitch, I'd like to kind of move aside a little bit. I want to help you out still, but why don't you make me an advisor? So now I'm a senior advisor to the club, and I'm also going to have a little bit of ownership in the club too. And now Stephen Hooper has moved up. He's on the men's side, and Jim Gabara, who you know from Washington Freedom days, way back when, is now the president of the club over there. So I stay in touch with those guys all the time, 2-3 times a week, and I stay in touch with Hitch all the time in that. But now I just represent the club as opposed to having to be there day in, day out. But,
we're the swag.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in my career, I've sort of moved to the next part, a semi-retirement, if you will, where I'm still involved with a few clubs, and the ownership side has become a nice little part of it that I'll hopefully be able to parlay into something down the road. But now I get to enjoy my grandkids a little bit more.
Yeah, that's right. When you compare what you're doing with the Blues versus what you did with DC United and other professional clubs, what's the comparison there?
Well, I think with the Blues, we tried to emulate what we did at DC United. We tried to make it a real professional atmosphere. And back in the DC United days, soccer was just making its comeback at the time. We talked earlier about the old North American Soccer League that the Washington Diplomats were part of in this area. Well, that league folded back in the mid-'80s. And there was no top-level professional league for about 12 years or so until the 94 World Cup. So when DC United came back out in 1995, it was really building off of that hunger for the game. You know, the soccer had not evolved. There were still plenty of regional leagues and lower-level leagues and that, but it wasn't at that top level, that Division I level. So when DC United came back, it really became selling the sport as more than players or team or whatever. DC United just happened to do it the right way. One on the field, and as Kevin Payne, the late Kevin Payne used to always say, our mission is to win championships, which we did, and serve the community. And we always made that a big part of our homework is whatever we're doing, no matter how many trophies we have in a trophy case behind us, it's how often are we out in the community? How much are we doing good in the community and working with not only fans that are going to pay us to come to games, but also helping their projects, helping particularly in the youth soccer world, like in CYA days and that, you know, getting the players to meet the younger generation, the next kids that are coming up. So they've got something to emulate towards, because as you think about it now, the Major League Soccer is 30 years old. Those kids that grew up back in those early days, they've never known any time in their life now where there has not been a top-level soccer league.
That's right.
You couldn't say that back in the early 90s or late 80s and that. So
I got a question about that. It's interesting. I was thinking about that as you were talking. So DC United has been around for 30 years. I'm surprised at that. I felt like I kind of remember when they came around. It doesn't seem that long ago. Okay, soccer is a different animal in sports in the U.S. Obviously, as is internationally. It's not the football, basketball, or baseball of the world at the professional level. Certainly is at the youth level with numbers. But do you think that 30 years ago, this is where DC United wanted to be in the MLS Soccer League? Do you think it's grown to what they thought? Do you think it's exceeded or underperformed their expectations in that 30 years?
Oh, I think it's absolutely exceeded it. I mean, you take a look at markets like Atlanta and Charlotte and Seattle that are drawing 40, 50,000, 70,000 a game.
That's impressive.
You know, not on a day in or week in, week out basis, but they've had crowds that big. They're averaging the 30 or 40,000 range. If you put Major League Soccer alongside almost any other league in the world right now, including the EPL, on an average attendance basis, they'd be very close to all of those leagues. You know, and the quality of the play has come way, way up ever since we talked earlier about David Beckham coming into the league back in 2006, 2007, I believe it was. That sort of elevated the level, and it made a lot of people around the world look and say, hey, this soccer in America could go again. It could be big. Because some of us are old enough to remember the old North American Soccer League with Pelé and Beckenbauer and Canalia, the big names of that time that came to play here in the United States. And that really kicked the game off back in the late 70s, early 80s. And it went away, as I said. Now take a look. Beyond Beckham, you've got, you know, Messi playing in the league now. You've got rumors that Cristiano Ronaldo could come play here. You've got all these other players that have now stepped into the league. And now, on a world level, Major League Soccer is getting very, very close to some of these other leagues around.
Okay.
Still not quite there. So I think it's a success from that range. I know it's a success from the ownership. Because in the early years, they were losing money hand over fist. Now you look at how many stadiums have been built around soccer-specific stadiums, beyond the Atlantas that play in the same stadium as the NFL team and that, but plenty of markets and cities around the country that are building their own stadiums. They're making the sport part of that landscape. So when they talk about football, baseball, basketball, now soccer gets included in that conversation. It's on ESPN Sports Center almost every night during their season. They're making the change in the season now. They're going to a more of a fall and spring calendar as opposed to a summertime calendar. So that'll change things a lot too.
You said they're going to a fall and spring?
Yeah.
So they're going to take like a break in the summer?
There'll be a
How
little
does
bit of a
that
break
work?
during the holiday times, very much like they call it the world calendar, the same as EPL plays on and all of that. So yeah, and it's going to take some adjustments. Nobody knows how it's going to work yet. You know, you look at Minnesota, and you know, although when I look outside today and we've got 2 feet of snow that have been around here for 3 weeks or so, it's you know, I'm not so sure DC United will be able to play a lot of games in the middle of the winter time either. You know, but weather-wise, there'll be some challenges. But, you know, the country's big enough, and they've got enough teams that are spread in the southern reaches and that they'll probably just adjust the schedule somewhat. So you'll play a lot more games in the southern parts of the country where it's warmer in those dead of winter. And then, you know, as it warms up a little bit more in the springtime, the rest of the country will get involved, you know, and those teams will still get to play. But it'll be an interesting change. And then with the World Cup coming this year, you know, around the area, that's going to elevate it even more. I mean, you guys all remember 1994 and how the World Cup coming to the U.S. kind of was the kickstart to not only Major League Soccer, but really getting people interested in the sport again. That's going to be tenfold this year in 2026 as the rest of the world is now coming to play here. And the U.S. has a very competitive team, too. I think that without making any predictions, I think they will certainly get out of their group and hopefully go a little bit beyond that, and wake a few more people up to the sport. You'll get a few of those baseball, basketball, football fans to hockey fans to start watching the sport.
I would say it's almost, like you said, Fred, it's growing. I think it might be surpassing hockey here, right? Like it might be that fourth major sport because you do see a lot more talk on the sports centers and things like that. And hockey's kind of died down, and that's more of a little bit of a niche kind of sport than soccer, right? Yeah. Soccer's that worldwide thing it's the phenomenon where everybody loves it. Right. So it is cool to see. Growing up playing soccer, I don't follow it as much as probably the sport I least follow. But the question I have, I know we talked about Beckham coming and Messi coming. What are some of the things you think it takes to get more of those international guys? Some of those, because it seems like those contracts are so big in Europe and things like that. What does it take to get more of guys like that to come over to the MLS?
Money.
Just money?
Money.
Yeah.
Not just money. I mean, money is a part of it. One of the things that I think is funny when you watch now, Messi, you just mentioned him, he can go shopping at Publix down in Miami on his own, doesn't need a bodyguard around, can get out of the car, go in with his family, go shopping in a grocery store somewhere. He couldn't do that in Spain or in England or almost anywhere else in the world. He'd get mobbed everywhere he goes. They like that here. Beckham liked it when he came to L.A. L.A., he was just another face. Okay. So they can blend into the lifestyle a little bit more. They like the lifestyle here in America, and of course the money doesn't hurt. They could live the good life when they do get here. I think basically it's overall quality of the play, though. That's what players that are in their prime, overseas, really are looking at. They want to come to a league that's pretty decent quality play, where they know that their game is going to be accentuated. So it'll come a time when we're not just getting the 30-plus stars to come and finish their careers here. There'll be a time when you've got that 20-year-old that's coming here to play. Start out here and then, build their career.
On top of that, and it's a good question. Also, on the flip side of that is keeping the best American talent in the United States to play in Major League Soccer instead of using Major League Soccer kind of as a springboard.
Right, exactly.
To go play internationally.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not only the top level, it's the developmental levels below that. Like MLS has MLS Next Pro. They've got academies with almost every club now. And the youth market in this area really drove the sport from the 70s all the way up through. But youth market numbers have got bigger and bigger and bigger every year. Now the major league clubs and the clubs just below them in the USL, as we talk about, United Soccer League, they're all developing academies and bringing up the youth players through that too. So now you have that pipeline. You have that place for a player to go and play and see that they can actually make a career out of this, and make some money at it, which they couldn't back then. And I go all the way back to the NASL because that was the era that I was brought up in. They had to limit or require the number of American players that played on the field and were on the roster for teams. Otherwise, they would have said, these American kids aren't good enough. Let's just go and recruit from everywhere else around the region or around the world and bring players in because they're better players than these American players. So the old NASL has to be credited with saying, look, let's start at this level. Ricky Davis is one of them, David Bursic, another. It was an era that, like I said, I was part of that. There wouldn't have been any opportunities at all if they didn't have the forethought to say, okay, let's put some of these spots, reserve them for American players. Now it's almost flip-flop the other way in that you've got most of the rosters are filled with American players with a few foreign players that have come in. But it's that blend that makes the game. Everybody always says America doesn't really have a style of play. Of course we don't. We've got 8,000 different nationalities that play the sport in our country. Of course, all those nationalities and their styles blended. So you can't say, they're playing the German style or the Dutch style or the South American style, Brazilian style. America is America's style. It's a little bit of everything. It's a melting pot, as we hear in all parts of the world, or in all parts of conversation, that it really, soccer is the true melting pot of the game here in this country, and everybody learns it in different ways. I had Scottish coaches, English coaches, Brazilian coaches, Greek coaches, Yugoslav coaches growing up, Mexican coaches. I learned a little bit of everything from every one of them when I was playing. And it's a bit that way now too, and American coaches have come along a long, long way. Bruce Arena back in the day, I think probably would have been considered one of the stronger coaches worldwide, and he's still doing it. You know, at 70 years old out in San Jose.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take you back to 1996. So 1996, when we were talking about players, first of all, they all had to have a second job because they couldn't make a living doing this, which is kind of funny to think. Not all of them. You had a few guys that were making enough money. So, Fred, you were involved with DC United in 96, the very first season. Tell us about that experience when you guys are getting started and you had to go home and tell your wife, yeah, I'm going to get involved and I'm going to try to make a living at this soccer thing. And she probably looked at you like you're nuts.
You know, and she wasn't the only one. She was the most important one, that's for sure. No, it was difficult. I mean, I was working back then in the NBA for the Washington Bullets. Always enjoyed sports. I moved from the West Coast out here. I used to work with Converse before that. So I had a lot of hand in the NBA and the LA Lakers back then and working with the sport. So here I was working for the NBA. I had to drive all the way around to Landover, which was the part I didn't like as much. So I had to go all the way over there to work. But I enjoyed it. It was in professional sports. Then this league starts up. As we mentioned, the 94 World Cup comes around. And they say, hey, there's going to be a professional league. Well, I had met some people, and they said, yeah, there's going to be a team in D.C. So I met with Betty D'Angelo at the time, and then Kevin Payne. Both are no longer with us. But they said, yeah, we're going to open up, and we're looking at putting the team in Herndon, Virginia. You know where that is? Yeah, I live in Herndon, Virginia. So it was almost fate. You know, I was like, this is going to work. You know, it's 5 minutes from where I live. We started up at the old Redskins Park. Commanders. Used to be called Redskins Park. We renamed it to United Park. The street that it was located on is still called Redskin Drive. I just went by there the other day, and sadly, the building that we used to work in is demolished. The fields that we used to play on and that CYA used to use, demolished, gone. So everything has its time, I guess. But back in those days, it was ideal. My life was home to work right there. And then, as you know, Mark, I started coaching my kids in CYA soccer. We practiced right over at Barnesfield Road, which is no longer there now. It's the newer fields have been built up over that way. But yeah, my whole life was soccer, and it was all right there in that small little hub of Herndon, Chantilly area and all that. It was great. It was a good life.
Well, the coolest part for us was, so my guys, so that you guys know, so Fred he was coaching his daughter's team. I was coaching my son's team at the time. Fred would bring cool stuff for us, like the socks. And I always remember the DC United socks. They had the logo on them. Yep. And you had a box of these socks one day, and it's like, yeah, you guys can just wear them. My guys wore those for every game. We were CYA, but they wore the DC United socks. And then they would meet the players, and they would be active in that. We went to every game. I mean, we took the kids down and to RFK, and it was just a big, when you were there back in the old days, which I don't feel like is as consistent now. It was. Those guys were part of our family. I mean, we knew these guys. We knew the players. Of course, the soccer was so new that nobody knew them. I remember when I first met Ben Olsen, he was at Starbucks in Herndon, and he just walked in. He was standing at the counter, and I looked at him. I was like, I think you're Ben Olsen, aren't you? He goes, yeah, I am.
Yeah.
And, he's just getting a Starbucks. This is when he's brand new on the team. He was fresh out of UVA, and he came with Arena, I guess. But and it's funny to think that now that just, we've kind of lost that sort of that connection.
Well, it truly was a family back then. I said, I mean, you could see the coaches or the players and coaches too. They all lived right out in this area. So they were all seen everywhere, just like everybody else. And guys weren't making very much money at all. All it would take sometimes was a team to say, hey, we're going to have a pizza party. Do you want to have a player come over? The player didn't care about getting paid. They wanted pizza. And so the players would come out to an event or something like that, and they loved it. They loved being part of it. And as we said earlier, the kids themselves now had somebody they could look up to and look after. And they say, hey, Mom, Dad, I want to go down to RFK and see a soccer game because I just met Ben Olsen or Brian Kamler or John Harks on a soccer field. He came out to our practice, or he came out to our photo day, or whatever it was that they came out to. They wanted to go and see them play down at RFK. So,
That's cool.
So, well, I brought a few things too for some archive.
Okay, let's hear it.
Now
Let's
these
hear
have to
about
go back home because my kids wore these and they would hate me if I gave them away. So first of all, there's my old CYA coaching gear, and this is 1990s fit, so I didn't put it on today.
Oh, yeah.
It wouldn't fit anymore, but the old coach's shirt with the CYA soccer logo in there.
Mark,
We've come a long way with that. Because I'll tell you what, first of all, that logo is tiny, and second of all, that's gross.
that material, I don't know if they made anything.
Yeah, well, it's still holding up in the hat. They went with it. We had to fit along with that. And then I've got a couple of the first travel teams because I was part of the very first travel program that remember Bill Casey started that up.
Mr. Casey.
Oh
Mr.
man.
Casey and Ralph Wills was, working on field space for us and all that. I was so happy to see the other day when my grandkids are now playing in CYA, and we went over to the new fields at Sully there, and they called them the Ralph Wills Fields.
Ralph Wills Field. Yeah.
Nice tribute to Ralph. He put a lot of time into the sport, in this area, and did a lot of good for the sport. Even though he himself, I don't think, was a soccer player early on, he saw the growth and the future and potential of it, and that. So I had created a couple of travel teams. My older daughter's team was called CYA United.
Of course.
Right after the girls named this, because they used to actually come out and practice on the CYA or the DC United fields sometimes. So a little funky 90s look there.
Yeah.
And then my younger daughter came along. She started playing, and they renamed their name the Swifts, CYA Swifts. This is back before they all were the same name and the same logo, same uniforms. They all could create
I miss those days.
their own uniforms.
I miss it that now we're all just, it will be CYA purple, black, and white.
Yeah.
And I kind of miss when you could be the Panthers, the Tigers, the Hawks, and each team has their own identity within the club. That was kind of because people remember back then, and you guys, you didn't have kids Scott, you did. But for your benefit, Zach, we would have our kids would be how people recognize them. Who'd you play for? For the 92 Hawks. That's who I was.
Yeah.
And people were the Grasshoppers. Remember that all these clubs that would have that team name, and you just knew that was the strongest team. And if you could compete against them, or if you made that team, everybody knew you were one of the better players. Yeah. So it's kind of cool.
Particularly too, the United team, CYA United. Like I said, we used to practice every now and then at DC United's fields over there, and kids can drive and that. But the United name came out of the fact that DC United had won championships early on, and they're like, what are we going to call this team? Let's call it United. All right, yeah. The girls all bought into it, and that. Those girls, many of them still live in the area. A lot of them have their own kids now, and that. My daughter has 3 of her own, my 3 grandkids, and that. They'll run into each other on the fields and all that stuff, and they always go, CYA United, man, CYA United. They remember those days, the cheers and that. And same with the Swifts, too. Still running some of those girls, and I still get called Coach Fred, even though I haven't coached in 25 years. I still get called Coach Fred, even by some of their kids. They introduce me as, this is Coach Fred. And so even their kids now call me Coach Fred if they see me anywhere in that, which is kind of neat. I mean, that's a legacy part of it that I always enjoyed. I got into coaching mainly because I saw, as my daughters grew up, that U6, U7, U8 range and that, the travel soccer thing had just become a thing. CYA didn't have travel at that time. We used to lose all of our better players, as they were, to other clubs because they knew that we had a pretty good rec program, and the kids would get picked off, so to speak, at the All-Star tournaments. We did all the recruiting for them. Hey, here's our best players, and you go to the Sterling tournament at Thanksgiving or whatever, and here'd be 100 travel coaches walking around like, who do you play for? Chantilly, yeah. You want to play for Burke? You want to play for Sterling? You want to play for Springfield? You want, all these other coaches were around there just plucking all the same CYA kids away to play somewhere else. So to credit Bill and, people like Mark and everybody else, let's keep our travel kids at home. Let's keep them here if they're decent players. So I got another travel coaching because of that. I wanted to keep my own kids, have them have a place to play, but also use my experience in the game to kind of teach it to the next generation. And if kids wanted to play in their local neighborhoods and that, they didn't have to commute to Springfield or Burke or to wherever else they were going to play. They could play right in their neighborhood with their friends. We weren't the most competitive teams in these girls teams that I put together. We played in WAGs WAGs is a women's girls league that was around Maryland, Virginia, DC. Played there a couple of seasons, got our heads handed to us, and the parents came to me and said, do we have to really drive to Maryland and Virginia to get beat like this? Can't we get beat in Virginia? So we ended up moving over to ODSL, the Old Dominion Soccer League, which was a great league. Didn't travel much more than maybe an hour away for any games and that, and did pretty well at that level in those leagues, and the girls still remember it. But I tell you, they couldn't tell you a single score or result of a game or that very often, but they remember the memories. And that's what it's all about.
We always think now that if we can impart anything on them, what you said about being Coach Fred, and I'm Coach Mark, and I've always been Coach Mark to all my, even guys that still come in. We have a Don from Titan Services that comes and still works on our field, and he introduces me as Coach Mark. He calls me, I'm Coach Mark, and his kids call me Coach Mark. And those are things that they're the same way. They don't know any of the scores. They don't know if we won, what division we were. And if I could just sit our coaches down now, you see these guys that are mid-30s, 40 years old, and they're so bent on NCSL Division III. We got to get to Division 4, and if we don't have our best player, we want to forfeit that game so that maybe we can. It's like, you guys, I wish that they could all know what we know now, that none of this matters at all. The stuff being called Coach Fred in 20 years matters.
Yeah.
And the score of that game and moving to NCSL 2 or whatever it is, or those are all cool things. It matters in the moment. I always feel like we have to have a bigger picture. And when you talk about players now, kids, they're willing to travel all over the place. They're always jumping ship, going somewhere else. Even that notion they're going to play with their friends like they did back in the day, and they were going to stay together as a team and win or lose, we're a team. It's kind of it's not really reality anymore.
Right.
Now it's, that club wins, I'm going to take my child over there, even though it's an hour away.
And you can see it just like you see around the rest of the world. If a kid is 15, 16, 17, and they haven't identified that they're going to be with a professional team, or at least try for a professional contract somewhere, that's their time to give up the game or to move on to something else. Whereas I think, one of the things I tried to guard against was I always wanted the girls to love the game, to play it because they want to be playing it, not because their parents said you have to play it, or because their friends said, you got to be on this team or you got to be on that team, as you mentioned. And that they want to play it because they have a love of the game. Because too many of the girls that I coached or saw coached by other teams and things like that, they were fantastic at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. Then they get to high school and like, I've had my time in soccer, and they grow out of the game. They burn out. They've just practiced too much, worked too hard, get yelled at too many times. They give up the game and they don't love the game anymore. Yep. And that goes away. Whereas I think, I coached our girls all the way up and through high school. They, like I said, are still lifelong friends, a lot of them, because they were together for all that. They had great experiences at the tournaments, and we used to go down to the Virginia Beach sand soccer tournament.
Yep.
Didn't mean anything. I couldn't tell you whether we did good, bad, or otherwise. I think we did do well one year, but that was only because I was keeping track. The girls were keeping track. Mm-hmm. For the girls, it was like, hey, let's play a few games. Let's go hang out on the beach for a weekend. They loved it. That was the best part of it all, and they remember those things as much of it, and they love the game still. They're coaching their kids now. The same fields we were just talking about. I was over there, and one of the girls that used to play for me, she's got a couple of kids, and they're playing on the same teams as my grandkids are playing on. So they're now in that room. They love the sport.
Got a follow-up question before we get too far down the road on a different topic here about what you said about the kids burning out in soccer and not doing it. Personally, as somebody looking on the outside, I think that's a problem for the sport in the United States. I just don't understand why that doesn't happen in other sports. And it happens in soccer. It does. But in the high school local level, the best players tend to stay with those sports, in my experience. And soccer tends to lose them, especially on the male side. I can argue that even all the way up through that, the most famous soccer players in the United States, probably 9 out of the top 10 are females. I bet if you went around and you asked people to start naming, you're going to have the Mia Hamms, the Rodmans, the Brandy Chastains. You ask me, I don't know if I can name Landon Donovan and somebody else maybe over the last year.
Only Christian Pulisic, because he.
Yeah, Christian Pulisic. Those are like the two big ones. And I think I was thinking about this drive-in that we're going to talk, is keeping the boys interested, because I feel like the girls stay interested. Maybe I'm wrong because I'm not that much into soccer, but it's something to think about. Like, all the girls are pretty famous all the way through. Is that something to do with it?
Well, think about the age groups too. I mean, as I mentioned, I kept my girls together until they were into high school. It's tough to keep them together once they get to high school, because they all have different interests and things like that. And the same thing happens on the guys' side. But also too, soccer is available to kids when they are as early as a year and a half now. My grandkids, one of my grandsons is playing the Kids United group over here, and they go as young as a year and a half. Barely walking, and they're kicking a ball around. They're already ingrained. Okay, I'm going to play soccer. So they've got it at their disposal. You don't always have that in basketball because of the heights and they can play the sport in a little game area and that, but they don't have organized clubs, leagues, things like that. Football doesn't really come to play almost until now. Flag football, it's good to see it starting to come about, but tackle football is certainly not until they're much into high school or close to high school age, just because of the physical side of it. And that hockey is a sport that's very, you have to have the ice, you have to have the time, you have to have all that. It's hard
to be able to stay up late and get up early.
Yeah.
So soccer is something that's readily available to every single kid. Little League baseball is probably the only thing that's even closer. T-ball and Little League and that. But even at that has thinned down in the numbers, because you need certain equipment, you need certain field space and things like that. But soccer is everywhere. So they're playing this, and then they get to that high school age, and now you've got all of a sudden, hey, I could play volleyball, I could play basketball, I could play lacrosse, I could play tennis, I could do all these other things that get thrown in front of them. Here's all these great athletes that have been doing nothing but running and running and running and getting their fitness up as they're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. They get to high school, 14. Now, hey, look at this world of sports I can go to. And those coaches are just like, you were a good soccer player, right? Why don't you come and play tennis for me? Or why don't you play this for me? You know, they start getting pulled in all directions. And that's part of the reason that soccer has not been able to hold its swing. Whereas basketball players, taller kid is going to end up probably gravitating towards basketball just because he's going to be seen by the coaches sooner and sooner to be pulled in, or a good shooter, and that is going to get pulled in. Then you've got AAU, and that there's still burnout. Believe me, I mean, both my daughters have a long way in the basketball.
Every sport has burnout. It's just something I was just getting your opinion on, because through the years, and I'm basing it off of just kids that I've known, but it's interesting. And you also mentioned something else back there about, you know, looking forward to like signing pro contracts. I forget in what context you mentioned that. I feel like the basis of a lot of these kids these days is not the pro contract, and this is in all sports, of gives them an opportunity to be looked at by colleges that they might not be looked at, even more so than a pro contract. It gives them an opportunity to go to college in the first place they might not be able to go to, or go to a better college, or get college paid for it in some ways. And so maybe that's part of
the contract right there.
That's a contract.
How much does it cost to go to college for 4 years in this country? You know, no matter what level you're at.
these days.
That's like a pro contract. So you're right. I mean, the college scholarship is what the parents, I think, see a lot of times. So the kids get to that point when they get in there. But at the soccer level, essentially, if you're not at the top level, and I'm talking mostly on the male side, the women's side, this works too as well. If you have not signed a pro contract by the time you're 17 or 18, it's move on to the rest of your life. Do something else. You might still be involved in the game in some way or that, but pro academies in most of the world are looking at kids to say, look, we're bringing you in at 11, 12, 13 years old. We want to groom you to 15, 16, 17 when we can offer you a pro contract. It's a business. You know, there's plenty of clubs in Europe. We heard this when we went to Europe that time in Holland. There's plenty of teams that they don't want to win the championship. And I'm talking about the top level of Dutch soccer, Dutch Eredivisie. You have the Ajax, PSV, Feyenoords, the teams that are always Alkmaar. They're always up at the top of that. That's their goal, is to win the championship, play in Europe in the CONCACAF champion, or the Champions League, and that's their goal. But then you have this whole lower tier in Dutch soccer. Their goal is to sell players. They sell players to other Dutch teams, to other teams around the country, or around the continent, around Europe, all over the place. And they sustain their business model by selling players.
That's interesting.
At 15, 16, 17 years old. They develop them when they're younger all the way up to this level to where they're a valuable commodity.
Wow.
And they don't even necessarily play for their own first team. They end up being sold somewhere else. They may come back and end up playing for that team if they're good enough. But that's their way.
Interesting business model.
Isn't Matthes one of those guys?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he played for the youth
Came from
program.
Argentina when he was 13 years old to play in Spain. And went over and played at Barcelona. Yeah, it's, you know, and that's the model around the world. The U.S. is not quite into that. You know, we're not bringing in 14-year-old kids to sell them somewhere else. It's starting to change, though. MLS is now starting to look at, okay, we developed like a Kevin Paredes that played here locally. You know, he ended up, he's playing in Germany, I believe now. Wolfsburg, I think, is who he plays for.
We have another 14-year-old that was signed a couple of years ago in Philly. That guy, I don't know if he's still where he is now. Do you?
Yeah. Well, and Freddie Adu, of course.
Yeah, Freddie
came
Adu
up and
with
played
DC
here
United.
at DC United. That was long before all of this sort of trend went. But
Yeah, Freddie was 14.
he was 14 when we signed him. He played his first game when he was 15. Really too much pressure on a young kid. Coming in as, you know, he's doing Sprite commercials with Pele and running around on RFK's field, you know. Put that pressure on him. He was making more money than anybody else in the locker room at that time. You had some pretty big names who were around back then still, you know, Marco Echeverri, Jaime Moreno. John Harkes was not with us, but he'd gone to other teams in that. So you had some pretty solid players that weren't making the money this 15-year-old kid was making now. Couldn't even drive to his practice.
And that creates, I'm sure that creates some
a lot of animosity and a lot of pressure on this kid.
Yeah.
And Freddie is a great guy. I mean, everybody said, oh, he's much older than that. He wasn't really that old. You talked to Freddie when he was at that bench when he was 15, 16 years old. He was a 15 or 16-year-old off the soccer field. On the field, he spoke differently. He played differently. He played as an adult there. But, you know, in real life, he was a kid. But, yeah, that was at a different era, you know. In these days now, 14 or 15-year-old kid that's coming up through Major League Soccer is going to be protected. they're going to get to play at an academy level. They're going to play at the next pro level. They're going to get seen. They might get a chance with the first team here or there to play, but they're going to be protected a lot more. And then if their value gets high enough, rather than even play on the first team, they may be sold off to Europe somewhere or to South America or Central America.
That's wild. Yeah.
And make the money that way because the club needs to sustain itself on the business side. So they could see a $2 million Andy Nahar. You remember him?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Same sort of a story. He came in when he was 16 years old as a high school player, came into DC United. He was playing with adult leagues in the adult Hispanic leagues around town in DC and ended up being seen by Kurt Anolfo back then. And they brought him into training camp and they said, this kid is good. It's really good. Ended up making our first team, was rookie of the year, and then was sold off to Belgium, to Anderlecht, for a couple $1 million, which doesn't sound like much in this day and age, but back then that was a huge, huge amount for a teenager to Europe to play.
And then he came back.
He came back. He played in Philadelphia, I believe, and he's played for the Honduran national team for quite some time too. But that sort of a changeover is happening in Major League Soccer now and in USL Soccer League levels and the Women's League too. In fact, the Women's League is interesting in that, as you mentioned, some of the American players, women's American players, have been the best, most well-known around the world. You know, Mia Hamm, Brandy Chastain, Julie Foudy, players like that. Now, the American teams are almost fighting a battle with the European clubs, the super clubs that are buying American talent, trying to get them to go to Europe to play over there.
Read a little bit about that. Yeah.
So the Washington Spirit are losing players potentially to European clubs, not because those European clubs are that much better than the Spirit is, and that it's because they got more money, because they're buoyed up by the men's side of the program. And to them, it's, again, that same business model. We want that player because they're a good enough player and they can take our team to the next level. And the American clubs got to catch up. They've got to be able to sustain themselves and keep those players at home.
I have a whole show on that.
I've got one for you. So all the things that you've done in soccer, I'm curious if there's something that stands out or that you would qualify as one of the most memorable things that's ever happened to you, aside from the coaching CYA stuff, because I know that's probably the winner, the clear winner. But is there any, all the World Cup stuff you've been involved with, is there just an event or something that stands out?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, I've worked in all kinds of international games and World Cup qualifiers and the World Cup in '94 and the Olympics in '96 when we hosted the games here and all that. But to me, it's each time that I've worked with a club that I've helped to start up, watch it go from really nothing to an entity. CYA or DC United, CYA United. See, DC United started up. We had never played a game. I started in October '95. We kicked our first ball in April of '96. So I was there right in the very beginning. We did the same thing out in Sacramento. I went out there and we started up with just a concept and idea. A couple of baseball guys that said, hey, this soccer thing's coming up. Sacramento doesn't have a club. I was out there working on an international game and met these guys and basically was commuting for 3 years back and forth, spending most of my time in Sacramento. But same thing, started with really nothing to kicking a ball. Annapolis the same way. And then I helped a couple of other clubs get started too. But it's that first game when you've started a club up from scratch and you walk out into the stadium and hear that roar of, wow, I helped to put all these people in the stadium. Not me personally. The club itself did it. I was usually involved in the ticket sales and marketing and that. So we were able to bring in, the people that knew how to do all of that stuff and get those things happening. But it all has to click. And each time when you walk in, the very first home game that we did with DC United back in '96, we had 35,000 people at RFK Stadium. For a sport that had gone away for a dozen years, our stars were our local stars, John Harkes, Marco Echeverry, Jaime wasn't even playing with us yet then, but those names were what we had to market in that. But we had to market the sport. And to get 35,000 people into RFK and have it rocking and the fan groups and all that sort of stuff, that was exciting to walk out in that stadium. The same in Sacramento. The first game we did out there, our stadium was not ready yet. We were playing on a temporary grounds that was being built at Cal Expo, which is just outside of downtown Sacramento. So we had to play in an older, antiquated stadium, junior college stadium that hadn't been used for anything other than track meets and a couple of high school football games for years. 20,000 seats, huge stadium. We sold it out. Walked in, here's 20,000 people screaming for a sport they hadn't seen in almost 20 years. And we got the attention of Major League Soccer way back then. Very first few games we played in Sacramento were in that stadium, sold out every one at 20,000 plus. And here's Major League Soccer going, wait a minute, they're drawing 20,000 people in Sacramento? How are they doing that? Who's this guy, Fred Matthes? Didn't he work in our league? and I started getting calls from Don Garber and Mark Abbott and the other Mark Abbott.
The other Mark Abbott.
The Mark Abbott from MLS. Started getting calls about, hey, what are you guys doing out there? Why is this working in Sacramento when it's not working in, at that time, Kansas City had just moved to their new stadium. And other ones, there was a lot of markets in MLS that weren't even drawing that kind of a crowd. What are you guys doing out there? I said, a lot of the same stuff we did in DC. We get out in the community's behind us. We help in different ways. Players are involved. Everybody's involved in it. And this town and this market are hungry for the game. Just as DC was hungry, Sacramento was hungry. 20,000 people a game there. It still leads the league in attendance every year in that. Annapolis, I mentioned our numbers earlier before we started up here. Same kind of thing. We started building a season ticket base. We were getting upwards of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. We were over 5,000. First year was about 3,500. Second year, about 5,000. We averaged 8,000 people, 9,000 people a game over the first 3 years that I've been there. Our opening game, we set the USL or NPSL. We were in the NPSL originally, the National Professional Soccer League. Which was a Premier Soccer League, which is a amateur level team. Set the record there for the first 2 years we were there with 10,000 and 11,000 people. We moved to the USL 2, which is the amateur level of the United Soccer League, had almost 13,000 for our home opener there.
Wow.
Navy
That's good.
Stadium.
How big is the stadium hold?
37,000. It's way too big for what we have there.
Yeah.
But to draw those numbers at that level, there's teams that are USL 1, USL Championship above us that weren't drawing nearly those numbers. Same sort of feeling, though. Walking out into that stadium, hearing that crowd, like, hey, I had a part in this. I helped to build something here. And now Annapolis Blues is on its way and holding up. And hopefully,
Good for you.
you know, around, it's not just me, it's the people that believe in the sport. And as we've been talking about how soccer is, you know, has it been there? They used to call it the sport of the 80s when it was in the 70s, when it was growing big. Then they said, well, it'll be the sport of the 90s. Then it went away for a while. Now it's like, you know, the new sport coming. Oh, wait till the next World Cup. Everybody's kind of waiting for soccer to get there, I think it's gotten there, at least in my experience and being at these different markets and that and seeing how it can work. The same thing can happen in almost any market in this country as long as the right principles are put behind it. You build around the community, you get people involved in it, you get them to buy into not just the tickets, but the whole club concept, much like you see in Europe. You know, the club that's down the street that plays in a little 6,000 seater is just as important to those guys that live in that town as, you know, in here would be the Commanders or the Jets or the Giants or whatever playing in 70, 80,000 seat stadiums. You know, that's the way the sport has grown around the world, and it can grow here the same way.
Well, we've got 30 teams now. So, I mean,
Exactly.
and who would have
MLS, yeah.
envisioned that when you started in 96 to think that there's 30 teams? And, and I know you were talking about back in the day, Sacramento becoming one of those teams. And I guess that was your aspiration. I remember you telling me when you went out there.
We were, built for MLS was one of our very first battle cries out there. We had Don Garber come out, the other Mark Abbott come out. They did a whole rally right around town and everything like that. Like MLS is coming to Sacramento. We built all of our strategies around that. They had an investor come in who was going to put all the money into it and build the stadium and everything else. And he got cold feet and walked away from it. And MLS said, fine, we'll go to Minnesota. We'll go to, I'm trying to think all the teams that came in after that, but it was 5 or 6 teams that have now joined the league.
Yeah, each year you'd hear, okay, there's going to be 3 new teams adding, and it wasn't you guys. And the funny story about the other Mark Abbott. So the Mark Abbott was the president of MLS.
He's deputy commissioner. Yeah, was his title.
Okay.
He's right behind Don Garber. Vice president of MLS. Yeah.
The funny thing is, so when I was a club rep, DC United for CYA, I would be the guy Fred would get the tickets for us, and I'd distribute them. I'd then lead this crowd of people down to RFK, and we'd have these games. And I'd go to will call. Often you'd be there. You'd be standing and getting me the tickets in will call. But I'd always have to say, my name is Mark Abbott, and use to circle it so that they would know it's not that Mark Abbott, it's the other, it's the little Mark Abbott.
The little Mark Abbott.
Hey, Mark Abbott. Yeah. It's funny with my phone too. My phone would ring sometimes, and now everybody has caller ID and all that, and Mark Abbott pops up, and I'm
You have to think about it a minute.
okay. Yeah, it's 703.
I cannot take this one.
Yeah, it's the other one. And I ran into Mark Abbott in Portland, actually, at the All-Star game there when I was in Sacramento, and Portland was one of our affiliates, and we were, again, pushing Sacramento to move to MLS. So I went up there, and here's Mark walking down the street in Portland. And I said, hey, Mark, how are you? takes my hand and we're talking a little bit, and he goes, you've done a decent job out there in Sacramento. We might be coming back here to talk with you guys some more on that. That's great. And I'm saying, it's funny because every time I talk to you, I think of another Mark Abbott. And it's the same when I talk with you too. I think of the other Mark Abbott and that. And he goes, "Oh, really? I didn't know there was another Mark Abbott." I said, "Yeah, he's in soccer too. So I'll get you two guys together."
I could argue that one's enough.
Yeah.
We got to get Mark Abbott a better goal.
We got to get Mark Abbott on the show. That would be fun to have the other Mark. After all these years that we've kind of talked about each other for 30 years, yeah, to get him sitting here. You're the other Mark Abbott.
Dueling Mark Abbott.
Well, that's been awesome. I got a question for you. This is kind of an off-topic question for you, just a quick answer question. Who's your Mount Rushmore of most influential soccer players of all time?
Players.
So you get 4.
It's hard because one would be very skewed towards American players, and I was a goalkeeper, as I mentioned before, so I tend to think of goalkeepers first.
Okay.
Arnie Mauser, Casey Keller, Tim Howard, Tony Meola, top 4 goalkeepers probably in my mind. There's other
Okay, so that's your Mount Rushmore of goalkeepers. There, I guess.
Goalkeepers.
Yeah.
Most any player.
The Mount Rushmore influential players worldwide.
Worldwide.
Have done the most for soccer.
Oh, Pelé needs to be
I'd say
there, right?
Pelé,
He's got to be.
Beckenbauer, Cruyff, and now Messi.
Okay.
Ronaldo, potentially. I think Messi has done more for the game than
I do too.
Ronaldo has.
I think you're right.
But definitely Beckenbauer in his time. Cruyff was, legendary, not only on the field, but off the field, coaching-wise. And Pelé, of course, was... You look at some of the things, some of the old films, the old black and white films of Pelé, what he could do with a soccer ball on crap fields, muddy fields, dirty fields. Guys that were able to take his legs out and not even get yellow cards at the time back then. And he would still keep coming above stuff with a smile on his face.
Yeah, there you
Phenomenal stuff he could do. The other guy that never really gets mentioned much because he cut his own career short is George Best. Look at some of those same tapes of George Best working on these crap English fields and that. Played for Manchester United back
I think he died relatively recently, right?
He did. He was he had some troubles with alcohol in his playing career and womanizing and drinking alcohol and that. But he came and played here in the United States.
Okay.
Most of these guys did in the old NASL. Best played in Los Angeles. I got to meet him there. And then he also played in San Jose for the San Jose Earthquakes. Real funny story, quick one. I know you want to make this short, but George Best played for San Jose, and they always call this the greatest goal ever scored in North American Soccer League. George Best got ticked off because the referees didn't make a call on a goal that was scored by, I can't remember who they were playing at the time. It might have been the Aztecs. It was the Aztecs because Ron was playing. So they score, and Best is ticked off, and he comes back, and he's screaming at the referee all the way down the field, just that with the ball, puts the ball down in the center, thing like that. Referee blows a whistle. Best takes the ball, dribbles past 1, past 2, past 3, past 4, past 5, past 5, and the number 5 guy is Thomas Rongen.
Oh, no.
Thomas Rongen's playing in the back for Los Angeles as defender. Thomas swings at him, misses him. Best cuts this way, cuts back this way past another one. Now he's inside the penalty area. He starts to cut back away from a guy, away from the penalty area, going back towards midfield. Thomas Rongen catches him for a second time. Rongen is defending midfield. He's a defender defending this way, but he's turning this way, and he's defending against Beckham or against George Best coming this way. And then Best beats him again, beats 2 other guys, beats the goalkeeper, scores the goal, picks the ball up, runs back to the center, screaming at the referee all the way back down the other way, and slams the ball down at the midfield.
Wow.
They call it the greatest goal ever
I
scored.
have to look that one up.
Look it up.
Yeah, we can look it up.
And look at Thomas Rongen getting beat twice in the same way. Thomas hates it whenever I bring that one up. But no, those probably are.
Fred, I think you forgot one. I feel like Maradona's got to be involved in that.
Maradona's there. I didn't see him play as often though.
Yeah.
You didn't. That's the thing too. In this day and age, you can watch your different channels and pick up games around the world. Back then, it was hard to get clips or to see any sort of a game unless you saw a player play in person or went to a game. I remember watching Toby Soccer in 90 Minutes on public television with Toby Charles, Soccer Made in Germany. That was our program that we used to pick the game up from. We used to watch the German games that Beckenbauer was playing in and Bertie Volks and some of the other players like that. And they didn't think that the American public could even follow 90 minutes of a game. So they condensed it down to essentially highlights, almost 60 minutes to show the game. And then at the halftime part, like 15 minutes into it, they would show parts of Germany and, kind of like a travel log almost of those cities. And that kind of drew you into the game. But it wasn't even watching a full 90-minute game. Now you can flip around any channel and you can watch, soccer from South America, from England, certainly on Prime TV. You can watch Germany, you can watch Holland, you can watch
Wrexham.
Saudi Arabia, Wrexham, a lower division team. The sport is everywhere now, so you can see a lot more players. But back then, Maradona, you never really saw him play other than in the World Cup when you get to see those games.
Yeah.
No, a phenomenal player. In fact, I'm showing tapes of him to my grandkids now, to his juggling routines and that. So.
I would say one more person on that Mount Rushmore that I was thinking about, and this is from I'll admit a non-thing, and this is not the direction you were probably thinking, but I'd say in the top 2 or 3 is Mia Hamm.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I would say you put that in almost the Pele of women's soccer. Grew the sport in the United States more than probably any person of any sport in the history of the United States. I would say for one gender would probably be her in that time period. What was the year of the World Cup that was so 92?
99 was the big one.
Was it 99? Okay.
Chastain.
Yeah.
That was the one that had 100,000 people in the Rose Bowl and really took the women's game up to the level it's at.
That moment in that game.
Yeah, I would say Mia Hamm definitely could be up there with them in terms of influence. Even before her, Michelle Akers. She was.
Well, you think about all those players. We all know them from '99. Now, it'd be hard to name anyone or say 3 players on the U.S. women's national team right now. But back then, we knew all of them. Yeah, we all know Rodman because she's local, right? So we hear about her. Alex Morgan, but she's retired now. So
Carly Lloyd, too, another one.
Again.
In between, they've all gone through. There was that whole, like you said, 99 was sort of the height of it all.
Yeah.
Those players hung on for a long, long time.
They did.
Until, and you've been through how many women's leagues now? 4 women's leagues in that time?
Yeah, that's
Same thing as the men's. I mean, the men's have been through the NASL, then USL and the different levels of that, and MLS, and you've had NISA and NASL and all the different ones that have been there. The women's have had the WUSA, the WPS, the WPSL, now it's, all the different other women's leagues that have come and gone in that time. Same thing. I mean, you had Mia Hamm playing here in Washington with the Washington Freedom as part of the WUSA.
Like Braddock High School, I believe.
Local product.
Yeah.
And everybody thought that would be it, that it was big enough and strong enough that the women's league, right after the 99 league, would take off and become the next greatest thing. And it lasted 3 years. And it was already gone. And they had to kind of resurrect it and keep it alive. Now, I think, with the WNS or the NWSL, I think you've got a very strong league, both financially and with the player talent level that's there. You're starting to see some stadiums being built, like in Kansas City. They've got a stadium. Louisville's got a stadium. They play at Audi here, but I think eventually there'll be a women's stadium as well, too. Once you get to that point where you're building your own real estate, now you can sort of dictate
kind of big time
where the game goes. So.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Scotty, I've been told that you might have a little trivia that has something to do with soccer today.
I do. Do you want to kind of kick us off?
What is this? I was not informed. Now we got a special episode of Did Scotty Make That Up?
A little bit. Fred needs to know that trivia is big around here.
Yeah, we do a lot of trivia. So, okay, here's my trivia question for you. Name the first and second place country to have the most World Cup champions, men's and women's combined. The most World Cup championships, men's and women's combined. There is a first place team and there's a tie for second.
So there's 3 teams.
Okay, so we'll let Fred take the first crack at this, and then I've got one that I think is pretty solid.
Germany, U.S., and Brazil.
Fred, I think you're going to be wrong. Let's hear.
I was waiting for Brazil. Brazil was the one guess I was going to throw out.
I would say it's number 1.
I would think Brazil's got to be in there.
Brazil is number 1.
Okay.
Tied with Germany.
Germany, I would have said. You said U.S. We haven't won yet, Fred.
Yeah.
Men haven't won.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, we appreciate you, man.
Yeah,
coming on.
enjoy
Always fun. Glad I could bring soccer to the
it's always nice to meet
the real
you.
football, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
A funny story. My younger grandson, the one that's the middle one right now. The other day we were talking about why do they call it soccer. I said it really comes from the name that football was called in Europe before. It was association football, and they use the middle three letters, SOC, to create the word soccer. So it's really an English term, is why they call it soccer. And when it started being played more regularly here, they said, well, you can't call it football because we already have American football, the football we know. He goes, yeah, but they don't really kick the ball in that game. He goes, well, I said, yeah, they do. There's kickers, and they kick every now and then. They kick off, and they kick field goals, and they kick extra points. He goes, yeah, but mostly they throw the ball. We should call that something else. We should call it throw ball.
Throw ball.
And so he goes, this should be the real football, because he hears that he watches international games all the time. And he goes, they always call it football when we watch it everywhere else. But really, there's this football with the helmets, and then there's that football where they kick the ball.
Can be confusing for a kid.
It was confusing for a younger guy. He's always a thinker.
Cool. Well, Fred, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
guys.
Yep.
Thanks for
appreciate it.
checking us out. Find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at CYA Sideline Podcast. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.